Some secrets are like stones in your pocket. At first, they're barely noticeable. You can walk around, live your life, almost forget they're there. But over time, they grow heavier. They pull at you. They change the way you move through the world. Robert carried his stone for 40 years. He was 67 years old when he finally found the courage to set it down. And when he did, everything changed. This isn't just a story about a secret. It's a story about the weight we carry, the lies we tell ourselves to survive, and what happens when we finally decide that truth matters more than comfort. Let me take you back to where it all began. Robert met Margaret in 1978. He was 27. She was 25. They met at a community fundraiser in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and your reputation meant everything. Margaret had these eyes that seemed to see right through you. She laughed easily. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Robert fell for her immediately. But here's the thing about falling in love when you're young. You're not just falling for a person. You're falling for the version of yourself you get to be around them. With Margaret, Robert felt like he could be someone better, someone worthy of her light. They were married within a year. For a while, everything was perfect. They built a life together. A small house with a garden Margaret tended every spring. 2 children who grew up to have children of their own. Sunday dinners, anniversary trips, kind of ordinary, beautiful life that most people dream about. But beneath the surface, Robert carried something he couldn't share. Before he met Margaret, Robert had been engaged to another woman. Her name was Carolyn. They'd been together for 3 years. They'd planned a wedding, picked out rings, talked about the future the way young people do when they believe everything is possible. 2 months before the wedding, Carolyn died in a car accident. Robert was driving. It wasn't his fault. A drunk driver ran a red light. The impact was instant. Caroline died at the scene. Robert walked away with minor injuries and a guilt that would never heal. Never told Margaret about Caroline. Not in the beginning when everything was new and perfect. Not after they were married when it seemed too late to bring up. Not when the kids were born, when life was busy and beautiful and there never seemed to be a right moment. Years became decades. The secret calcified. It became part of him, like scar tissue over an old wound. And here's what Robert learned about keeping secrets. They don't just stay in one place. They spread. They color everything. Every time Margaret talked about their love story, Robert felt the weight of the thing he wasn't saying. Every anniversary, every moment of intimacy, every I love you, there was always this invisible distance between them. Not because he didn't love her. He loved her more than anything. But because love without truth is like a house built on sand. It might stand for a long time, but it's never quite stable. Robert was 66 when he started having the dreams. Caroline would appear, standing at the edge of his consciousness, not angry, just there, present. A reminder of everything he'd buried. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, his heart racing, Margaret sleeping peacefully beside him, and he'd think, what am I doing? What have I been doing all these years? Here's a question I want you to think about, and I'd love to know your answer in the comments below. Have you ever kept something hidden because you thought revealing it would hurt someone more than the silence? Sometimes we convince ourselves that secrets are acts of protection, but are they? Really? Leave your thoughts below. I read every single one. The dreams became more frequent, more vivid. Robert would see himself at the funeral, 27 years old, destroyed by grief and guilt. He'd see Caroline's family, their faces etched with pain. He'd see the moment he decided he couldn't carry this into his next relationship, the moment he chose to bury it all and start fresh. Except you can't really start fresh when you're carrying the past in your bones. One morning, over coffee, Margaret noticed he was quiet. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You've been somewhere else lately," she said. "Where do you go when you drift away like that?" Robert looked at her, this woman who'd given him 40 years. This woman who deserved to know all of him, not just the parts he'd deemed acceptable. "I need to tell you something," he said. They sat in their living room, the same living room where they'd raised their children, celebrated holidays, weathered storms, 40 years of memories in those walls. Robert told her everything. About Caroline, about the accident, about the guilt that had never left him, about the decision to keep it hidden, thinking he was protecting her from his past, from his pain, from the complicated truth of who he'd been before they met. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to justify it, just told the truth, finally, after all those years. Margaret listened. She didn't interrupt. Her face went through a dozen emotions: shock, hurt, confusion, something that looked like grief. When he finished, the silence in the room was deafening. 40 years, she whispered. You kept this from me for 40 years. Robert nodded. There was nothing to say that could make it better. Did you? Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. Did you ever stop loving her? I don't know, Robert said, and it was the most honest he'd been about anything in decades. Part of me will always love who she was, who we were, but Margaret, I've loved you every single day we've been together. That was never a lie, but everything else was, she said. Every time I told someone our story, every time I thought I knew you completely, it was built on something missing. If you're finding this story meaningful, if it's making you think about your own life and relationships, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. What happens after truth? Margaret didn't leave, but she didn't immediately forgive him either. What happened was more complicated, more human than either of those extremes. She was angry, hurt, betrayed. Not because of Caroline. She understood that Robert had a life before her, that grief and loss are part of being human. She was hurt because he'd decided, for 4 decades, that she couldn't handle the truth. That he'd made himself the guardian of what she was allowed to know about the man she'd married. You took away my choice, she told him during one of their long, painful conversations. You decided what I could and couldn't handle. You treated me like I was fragile instead of your partner. Robert had thought he was protecting her, but what he'd really been protecting was himself, from vulnerability, from judgment, from the fear that if she knew all of him, she might not want him anymore. They went to counseling. At 67 and 65, they sat in a therapist's office like newlyweds, trying to figure out if they could make it work. It was humbling. It was necessary. Slowly, something shifted. Margaret started to see that Robert's secret wasn't about not loving her. It was about him not knowing how to love himself, not knowing how to integrate his pain into his identity without being consumed by it. And Robert started to understand that intimacy isn't about perfection. It's about being fully known, the good, the bad, the complicated, and being loved anyway. Here's what nobody tells you about truth-telling. Sometimes it destroys things. Sometimes it creates space for something deeper. 6 months after the confession, Margaret asked to visit Caroline's grave. Robert hadn't been back since the funeral, 40 years earlier. The thought of it filled him with dread. But Margaret insisted. They drove together, 2 hours, to a cemetery in a town Robert had tried to forget. They stood in front of a simple headstone, Caroline's name, the dates that bookended a life cut too short. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke not to Robert, but to Caroline. Thank you, she said softly. Thank you for loving him when he needed it, for being part of his story. I'm sorry I didn't know about you. I'm sorry he carried this alone for so long. Robert broke down. Decades of grief, guilt, and isolation poured out of him. And Margaret held him, right there in that cemetery, while he finally grieved the life that ended and the lies he'd told to escape it. If this story is resonating with you, if you want to see more content about real relationships, real struggles, and the courage it takes to live authentically, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Share stories like this every week. Stories that matter. Stories about the complicated, beautiful mess of being human. Robert and Margaret's marriage didn't go back to what it was. It became something different, something more honest. They talk now in ways they never did before. About fear, about shame, about the stories they tell themselves, and the truths they avoid. Their conversations have depth they'd never accessed in 40 years of marriage. Their children notice the change. One of their daughters asked what happened, why they seemed different, closer somehow, more present with each other. We finally stopped hiding, Margaret told her, even from each other. Robert learned something profound through all of this. The things we hide don't protect our relationships. They poison them, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like a leak you don't notice until there's water damage in the walls. And Margaret learned that forgiveness isn't a one-time event, it's a practice. It's choosing every day to see your partner's humanity. To remember that everyone carries things they're ashamed of. Everyone has moments they wish they could redo. Robert is 69 now. Margaret is 67. They've been married for 42 years, but they count their marriage in two phases: the 40 years before the truth and everything after. When I think about their story, I don't think about the secret. I think about the courage it took to tell it. At 67, when you've built an entire life, when you could easily take your secrets to the grave, Robert chose vulnerability, not because it was easy, because it was necessary. We all carry things. Stories from our past. Moments we're not proud of. Truths we've hidden because we thought revealing them would cost us love, respect, belonging. But here's what Robert and Margaret's story teaches us. The cost of silence is higher than the cost of truth. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in ways you can measure, but over time, secrets create distance. They prevent real intimacy. They keep you from being fully known, fully loved, fully yourself. If you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, if you've lived long enough to have a past, to have regrets, to have things you've kept hidden, this story is for you. It's not too late for truth. It's not too late for authenticity. It's not too late to be fully known by the people who matter most. Will it be easy? No. Will everyone understand? Probably not. Will it guarantee a happy ending? There are no guarantees. But living a lie, even a well-intentioned one, even one that's lasted decades, is no way to honor the time you have left. At some point, you have to decide, do I want to be comfortable or do I want to be free? Robert chose freedom. And while it cost him something, while it shook the foundation of his marriage and forced both him and Margaret to rebuild from a place of truth, it also gave them something they'd never fully had before: each other, completely, honestly, without barriers. We spend so much of our lives trying to be who we think others want us to be. We edit ourselves. We hide our scars. We present polished versions of our stories, leaving out the parts we think are too much, too messy, too human. But the people who truly love us don't want our perfection. They want our truth. Robert waited 40 years to learn that lesson. You don't have to wait that long. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you've kept hidden because you thought revealing it would cost you love, consider this. The people who matter will surprise you. They're stronger than you think. The freedom that comes from being fully known is worth the risk. At 67, Robert found the courage to be honest. At any age, it's possible to do the same. The question is, will you? Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, if it made you think, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your own experiences if you feel comfortable. Sometimes we heal by sharing our stories with each other. And remember to subscribe for more stories about real life, real relationships, and the courage it takes to live authentically. See you in the next video.